Noel, hello. How are you?
Hey, how you doing, Pete? Good to meet you.
Likewise, great to have you here today. I'm really excited to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is optimization of revenue engines. That's all. I unfortunately I don't have my sales nerd mug here. I have my no dashboards mug, but if I had my sales nerd mug, it would be more appropriate. But I'm very excited to talk about this today because I've been a big fan of optimizing the revenue machine for a long time, and I know that that's something that you guys at Conga think a lot about. So folks, thanks for joining us here today. We're going to be talking about optimizing your revenue lifecycle here, um, accelerating lead to cash, optimizing all that, and conveniently, we have the CEO of Conga here, which is obviously a leader in the space. So I'm super excited about that. A little bit more about Noel here in a second, but just really quick, thanks for joining us today. Obviously, this is a Modern Sales Pros event. Modern Sales Pros is the nation's largest sales operations and leadership community that has 40,000 folks, right? 40,000 revenue operations, sales leaders, et cetera. And the purpose of Modern Sales Pros is really pure education. It's to help you get better at your job. Um, and the way that we do that is through um, live events and peer interaction, things like that. Um, whether it's at the Dreamforce or the Forrester Expo or the Gartner Expo or what have you, or a city near you soon, but also digital events like this, where we bring business leaders to talk with y'all about important topics that are going to impact the way you do your job. So thanks for joining us there. If you weren't already a member of the community, we're going to go ahead and add you after the fact here. But thanks for joining us. Little bit of housekeeping here. Um, feel free to use the Q&A panel, and we'll see if we can answer your questions, or alternatively, we'll answer them in the chat as we go there. And then for folks who um, can't hang with us all the way through, it's going to be recorded. We're going to send it out after the fact as well. So really quickly, this event is sponsored by both Conga, which Noel is the CEO of, and also Accenture, which is a very important partner of Conga's in terms of systems integration and deployment and kind of business structure, what have you. Noel, maybe you can kind of give folks a little bit of a preview on what Conga does, what problems they solve, what Conga's customers do with the solution, and then how Accenture plays with that before we get into the rest of the content.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, what Conga is about is helping customers really translate sales activity into profitable revenue. And we created a category called
Love
Revenue
it.
Lifecycle Management a couple of years ago, and for B2B sellers, and to allow them to sell, contract, fulfill, and renew products and services that they offer. Conga today, we're backed by world-class software investors that only focus on the software segment in Thoma Bravo and Insight Partners, which is frankly it's great to have both investors in the asset itself, because we get to learn a lot from both of them actually, and they both have a lot to offer. I would say Conga kind of really grew up as part of the Salesforce ecosystem.
Yep.
We were, the majority of our customers would be significant users of Salesforce Cloud today.
Yep.
We're very much we're a summit partner in the Salesforce ISV partnership. We're probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, ISV at this juncture within Salesforce. We've about 10,000 customers on a global scale.
Wow.
These would be some from the the largest of the large companies, people like GE Healthcare, Starbucks, Hitachi Energy, to smaller, more growth-oriented companies, oftentimes in tech, where you have a lot of kind of startups that are growing, and we see them grow over time, which is exciting. And I would say we are horizontal in nature in all the markets we serve, but we kind of really have three dominant verticals. We'd be very strong in software tech, and we'd be very strong in health and life sciences, which is quite a complex vertical.
Right.
We're very strong in manufacturing, financial services, and then just general services related companies as an organization. And, I would say then with Accenture, who's been, become a very strategic partner for us,
Mhm.
it was really, I would say, born out of us working together on large transformational programs,
Right.
large transformation, like with Roche. We're doing a massive program of work with Roche called Aspire, which is a major digital transformation across multiple divisions, including ERP, quote to cash, etc. And that kind of grew very naturally, I would say. And Accenture is the largest GSI for Salesforce implementations as well. So they really have kind of breadth, depth, and really deep industry expertise as well, which helps us a lot because our the implementation of these kind of transformational programs are complex.
Yep.
And they're multifaceted. There are global dimensions. There's complex dimensions. There's navigation of organizations, and they are much better at doing that than we are. And and
They've seen the movie before multiple times.
exactly. So it allows us to really do a little bit more work, frankly, on building world-class products, which is what we're about.
Yep, awesome. Well, I'm very excited to kind of like talk about the balance of like complexity and simplicity, right? Kind of sounds like an oxymoron
Yeah.
there a little bit, but as somebody who's like like I was saying, like a revenue machine optimization geek, obviously you want to reduce complexity, make things simple, provide guardrails, provide swim lanes, but you don't want to hamper people from being able to do the things that they need to be able to do, which seems like an impossible task, but conveniently that's why there's clever software organizations that try to help facilitate that. So I'm excited to talk kind of about that, about cutting that Gordian knot, about solving that oxymoron here in the next kind of 40 minutes. For folks who don't know me, my name is Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. Atrium, for folks who don't know, we make sales performance management software that helps organizations improve rep attainment through the automation of all manner of performance management kind of behaviors, right? Both at the manager level and at the rep level. So mainly it's just like, it's automated accountability, automated coaching, and automated encouragement, all the sort of things that we would wish that our managers would do day in, day out necessarily, but oftentimes don't have the time to do, or, because they're on calls and what have you. But also just, but also sometimes are less apt to do. So allowing that to automating that, especially with like large language model AI, really helps to facilitate that. Oh, and then I also am the founder of Modern Sales Pros as well. So that's a little bit on me, but more importantly is Noel here, who's the CEO of Conga. But first and foremost, Noel, your English sounds a little different than my English. I have a Southern California and Orange County accent, regional accent. Just wait until I say dude sometimes during the presentation here. Where are you from originally? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your story and how you ended up as the CEO of Conga.
Yeah, obviously, it's not a Georgian accent, and I live in Atlanta these days. But I say I'm a dairy farmer from Ireland, and my path to being a software tech CEO is an interesting one. So I started my career, traditionally working for the US based software company, European headquarters in Dublin, engineering grad into that. Then worked in the telco segment, which was always with mission critical software, provisioning systems, billing systems, network management systems. So I got to travel the world early in my career with really difficult customers and high scale and mission critical customers. And that probably led me into a long tenure in retail software, and going through the kind of the digital transformation of retail, which was a great journey, a fabulous journey, fabulous learning journey. I'd probably describe myself as a builder of companies. I'm an entrepreneur by nature. I'm a product guy by nature, and kind of found myself from bootstrapping startup companies with no funding to selling them to more mature companies, and then now managing organizations that are probably more mature and more at scale. And I don't move very often, which is maybe a little bit unusual for software companies, but this is really my third company through in 24 years now.
Wow.
I would say I have a big passion. I'm a big believer in culture-based organizations. I kind of given myself the title of culture leader just to make sure that it's embraced and sponsored from the entirety of the organization. So I've been
Sure.
in my early days, I became a big advocate of Jim Collins in the days when he built to last first and then good to great. And I've known Jim now for a long time. I would say Pat Lencioni's work on 5 dysfunctions of the team saved my startup at a time where we were really struggling to work as a team.
At each other's throats.
Yeah, between the team in India and the team in the US and all the normative things that happen in startup land. And that probably brought me then into being on, I would say, really the front lines of the digital transformation of retail. And retail is I would say historically traditional business, in terms of buying, pricing, brick and mortar stores. But
it's been around for a while. It's not the oldest profession, which I think is maybe like we're not allowed to talk about that on this event, or maybe the second oldest profession. But it's definitely an old profession, from buying things, packing in a margin, and then delivering them to your customer. It's been around a second, right? Probably a little bit resistant to change.
Very resistant to change. And you think about the impacts of them. You start looking at those organizations who embraced digital, embraced transformation, invested in it.
Yeah.
They became winners, and then there's a lot of people who became laggards and are no longer with us.
True.
Because they didn't make the change. So that's and I sit on a couple of boards as well, which is nice. I sit on Anaplan's board and Octane's board, so it's nice also kind of get a bit of a different perspective, seeing other organizations go through transformations, tech privates going through their journey of transformation, optimization of sales, optimization of go-to-market, all the usual things that we'll talk about here in a little bit as well. But that's a little bit of my background.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, this, like, as a startup person myself, I think one of the things that startups have always had as an advantage, and since we're talking about the canon of business books, the innovator's dilemma really is rooted in the fact that large organizations can't change.
Yeah.
Right. They not only do they not have the intestinal fortitude to change, they also are unwilling to jump off of the burning platform that they're on, even though they can literally see that it's burning. And so as a result, to quote kind of Mark Andreessen, innovation can get to distribution before distribution can ingest innovation. And I think my hypothesis, at least I'm kind of seeing this in the market right now, is that back in the day, layering in software and technology to an existing kind of legacy organization was such a new behavior that organizations were very poor at it, right? Yeah. So it made sense to create a brand new organization that was technology first, right? Airbnb, you could make the argument that Airbnb is a hotelier, yeah, right? A digital first hotelier, and then they just happen to bootstrap off of, bedrooms and spare bedrooms and what have you. But I think that's actually changing. Right. And so a great example, and I know that we're going to talk about Starbucks later, which I'm really excited about because I'm a big Starbucks fan, both the coffee, but then also the operationalization of the the retail environments. And I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff in the back office that is optimized as well. But Domino's is one of my favorite case studies here of just an organization that like there were all these startups in the Silicon Valley that thought that they were going to be like digital first pizza delivery, like both manufacture and then delivery, and then Domino's was like, actually, no, that's going to be us, and then proceeded to do so, and just
Yeah.
like blew up their market cap, and just like anyway. So I think that what's interesting there, and there's doing it like software native, which is hard, and then there's doing it in like maybe a low code way, which is
Yeah.
where you like there's like not doing it and not changing, in which case you're probably going to die. And then there's like doing it full like building it in Java or like
Yeah.
Node.js or whatever, and that's actually not easy, right? Like as someone who runs a software company, software is awful, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the middle part, right? There's the middle part there, which is like, can you partner with something that is extensible enough to like to help you optimize your business process, and potentially have partners to do that, so that you can capture that value, but without like the huge risk associated with like, hey, we're going to build everything from scratch, and then also what is like clearly an untenable approach, which is to do nothing, to like not change at all. And so I'm excited to kind of hear about how you guys help organizations not do nothing,
Yeah.
which is kind of inarticulate, but I think I'm saying it that way on purpose. Is like, hey, we have to make sure that we're not going to do nothing. We have to do something. And the question is like, how do we go ahead and work on that? And so I think first maybe we can talk about here is like you had noted earlier that you guys kind of put your stake in the ground and said, hey, we're going to create this category, we're going to call it a thing, we're going to put a name on it, we're going to
Yeah.
call it Revenue Lifecycle Management, RLM. Maybe you can kind of unpack that a little bit for our audience here, so they can, because I think people will probably be familiar with like document automation, probably a little bit familiar with CPQ, but maybe less familiar with like the merging of the two.
Yeah. So I think that's exactly right. I think so if we take a step back for a second, and we look at the fact that in my mind I often use the expression that revenue is the fuel that powers companies, and
Sure.
I think the right kind of revenue is sustains companies, because there's different types of revenue one can go after. And for me, when we looked at the construct of revenue lifecycle management, it was really born out of for us, a little bit of a gap between what we term as the front office systems and the back office systems. And you look at all the processes, the end-to-end process itself of actually translating sales activity into revenue, it's really fragmented today. And particularly for companies who've got multi-revenue type products, whether it's services and software, whether it's hardware and software and services, whether it's usage-based, consumption-based, the complexity just amplifies very quickly. And it also requires, to pull off revenue, it requires really a high degree of cross-functional collaboration across key personas. And if you look at most organizations, that's not a natural motion that happens without friction in most organizations. There tends to be, when you have all the C-suite personas having to collaborate around revenue, that's not a frictionless environment at all. So we kind of,
even if you make them read 5 dysfunctions of a team and like put them in a conference room together and say, hey, you guys need to be, even in that scenario, there's still friction. And the bigger the organization gets, the more the friction is, because there's fewer and fewer people that are doing a single thing, or sorry, like that are doing multiple things, and it's all centralized in one brain or like one workflow. And instead you have abstraction there. So like, yeah, the bigger you are, the like harder that problem gets.
and then it gets further amplified by M&A, right? So M&A is the thesis of M&A is always kind of land and expand. The problem with the expand motion or cross-sell motion is it's seldom really pulled off properly, and partly because your friction gets amplified with new personalities and insecurities and human nature of what goes on. So for us, what we try to do is kind of, how do we break down those kind of end-to-end processes into a thoughtful structure? And we have this idea of a life cycle. So revenue is a life cycle, from landing a customer to maximizing the customer share of wallet, to renewing, and understanding which customer profiles are most profitable for your business, and where do you want to burn your calories with the right customers, because every customer requires energy. The question is, what are the ones that are going to be the most productive for you, and how
Is the juice going to be worth the squeeze?
exactly. So we kind of put it into the kind of four kind of quadrants on a circle. We talked about proposing and quoting, so the ability to kind of have a, harmonize a product catalog, be able to have one product catalog in the first place, be able to rationalize things like pricing, rebates, promotions. So it's kind of around the entire value proposition of all the products and services. And then be able to kind of, whether that's a self-service motion, whether that's a sales led motion, a direct motion, whether it's a partner motion, either way, that's more how you want to kind of go to market on the front side of it. But then kind of being able to take those sales personas and bring them then into the ability to kind of negotiate quickly and execute contracts that, allow you to comply, be in regulatory compliance, manage risk, do it efficiently, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then kind of being able to go from the obligations that are actually in the contracts to ensuring you can manage the fulfillment of those obligations across all revenue types.
You have to deliver on your promises? What, there's no ramifications to not delivering on customer promises? Huh.
It's a novel idea.
Weird.
But then be able to bill for them, and then match what was on the contract of what was on the invoice. Again, most companies are really, really poor at doing that because they have different back-end systems.
Yep.
Different ERPs are spitting out different invoices for different products in different regions. And then you've done all this work to land a customer. Now, how do you renew a customer and expand, more products, look at utilization, look at adoption, look at being able to do things like drive adoption motions when early in cycle, before you get a Dear John letter of, well, we're downselling, or we're churning, we're downsizing the number of users, or we're churning out the product entirely.
We very much have appreciated our relationship together and hope to do business with you in the future. However,
yeah, we only use 20% of your product, so we're gonna scale it back by 80%. So to me, I think that's quite key. And if you look at most organizations today, it's quite fragmented technologies. There's bits of third-party software. There's a lot of custom code. There's a lot of huge amount of manual intervention that goes along between sales departments, product departments, legal, CFO, CXO, and every organization we see, it is not a frictionless process by any way, shape, or form. The second thing then for me, I think to that is, once you can start identifying all the data around revenue, the product catalog, the pricing, the discounting, the contract, the order, the bill, the renewal object, the asset, the utilization of the asset. If you take all of that kind of revenue related data, now we've got something that's interesting. We can actually bring a lot of intelligence around it that today is just impossible to do. So you start looking at things like, well, how do I drive up price increases in my current cohorts of customers? What do they look like? As an example, what's the optimal package of products that works? What's the product combinations that allows me to win most over my competitor?
Sure.
And while minimizing my discounting. So there's lots of things you can do once you understand the end-to-end life cycle itself. Where have I got revenue leakage opportunities because my what I contracted for is not what I'm billing? Companies are very unsophisticated in that. And then when you start looking at bringing in M&A, and where people have contracts were put in place 5-10 years ago, people don't understand what's in the contracts anymore. So there's such a breadth of data and insights that's available in the contracts today that's not understood systemically within an organization. So
yeah, and the funny thing is like some of those questions are like not very complicated, like SQL queries necessarily, right? And then of course, maybe you like throw a little large language model like AI on that as well. But the data has to be in the same place to be interrogatable, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's oftentimes can be some of the biggest lift there. And so one of the big ways that you can make sure that the data is all in one place is to make sure that it's like well structured to begin with up
Yeah.
front, right? Like to make sure that the right bits and pieces and fields and what have you end up being populated up front throughout the sales motion, such that it can like follow along later on, and like that information never gets that information never gets lost. One thing that you had kind of mentioned there, that's a topic that keeps coming up with sales leaders that I talk with, is the notion of you were talking about M&A as relates to like the organization being disparate, like the selling organization kind of like
Yeah.
having different functions within it. The other thing too is that the challenge with M&A, and I'm a bit of a student when it comes to sales motions and kind of sales motion excellence, is cross-selling, and is kind of like the last frontier. As I like to say, it's like double black diamond sales management and sales
Yeah.
leadership for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
One, like you've got maybe you have different personas that you're selling to. Hopefully not. Usually, like in an acquisition sort of situation, they're ideally selling to the same persona or like the same budgetary function or whatever, but not always, right? Not always. So if they're selling to different personas, like now the sellers have to like think about that stuff, or you have like an overlay function, or you have a vertical sales organization for both of those. If it is the same type of seller, sorry, the same persona, even in that situation, probably the problems that are being, like, you could imagine sell like Anaplan and Conga
Yeah.
both probably talk to finance in some sort of capacity at some point. So if like in some magical future state, those organizations, like the same company was selling both of those solutions, you'd have to talk about them differently. They solve different problems, right? And so making sure that the seller, right, is positioning the appropriate products
At the right
to make
time.
sure that cross-selling is actually happening there, without having like relying on them to do that, like that synthesis, that fusion in their own brain, which
Yeah.
we would hope that people would do, but like hope is not a strategy.
Yeah.
And so like I think that's a really kind of powerful thing that I keep hearing about in my conversation with CROs, especially in large organizations. So like, I spent a lot of time with the folks at Gainsight. They've been acquiring a bunch of different products to become this like unified kind of customer revenue suite. Same
Yeah.
with, there's a company called Xactly that's
Yeah.
owned by Vista. They're adding more and more to like the forecasting and performance
Yeah.
management side. Okay, cool. So thank you for defining RLM. I appreciate that. And so I guess then the question is like this whole concept of a lifetime life cycle management is different than just kind of like, hey, I need a quoting tool,
Yeah.
right? Hey, I need a CPQ in order to make sure my reps aren't dropping their pants on
Yeah.
price. Hey, I need document automation in order to like
Yeah.
generate like a PDF or whatever. This is a little bit more expansive than that, and also potentially more extensible. So how have you been seeing kind of the market adopt this, kind of the market dynamics around this? Which industries are doing a good job of it, which industries are maybe doing less of a good job of it, et cetera?
Yeah, and I think there's the things you were talking about are all what we would term as kind of common services, and we've kind of gone from, I would say, you look at a natural progression of companies. You go from kind of, are you a feature-based company, are you a product-based company, or a platform-based company, right? You kind of, and there's a logical transition there, and some companies, are always a feature, and they get acquired early and play and they become a feature to some other people's product and so on. So for us, kind of the avenue we're looking at is, how do we take all of our services, make them decompose into API first accessible capabilities? Whether it's pricing, whether it's coding, whether it's contracting, whether it's signing, whether it's DocGen, billing, et cetera, et cetera. So we have about 500 different services now that you can use at a macro level, micro level, any which way you want to go do. And then I think there's two types of, in reality, there's two types of people. You talked a little bit earlier on about, we got the greenfield people, which are super easy because they've no legacy, they've no inertia, and they've nothing to replace. So they're not encumbered by it all. And so they can absorb more quicker, it can get going faster. So, whether you buy it by the slice, you buy it in whole, that's one option. So typically greenfield guys tend to go a little bit faster.
Yep.
listing people then back to your point about inertia, scope, framing of the problem, and there's comprehension of the end-to-end cycle itself. Sometimes that starts with you got to fit into where they're at right now, and then kind of
Totally.
expand a little bit naturally out of it. So there's a couple of different.
Scope it appropriately, make sure that we can actually have a high probability of success. It's kind of like features in software, right? Where like you have to like consider risk, right? Like level of effort versus level of effort versus potential upside crossed with like, is it going to be successful or not? I can totally imagine that as like thinking about that when layering it into your revenue lifecycle management strategy.
And but if you look at, like, we talk a little bit about kind of there's 6 dimensions of what we term as a kind of a revenue advantage. And if you look at what those kind of six kind of dimensions are, there's one around the age-old thing of predictability. Like, how do you predict your revenue? And there's it depends on the revenue type and so on, and we can go through a couple of examples of what I mean by that. But that's an art. There's a science that can be brought to that brings more visibility in how you can reliably predict what's going on in revenue, number one. Number two is you talk about the construct of revenue velocity. How do you move revenue through your pipeline faster? How do you remove the friction within your organization so you can contract easier, you can standardize the mundane, you can elevate up humans in your organization, do smarter things as opposed to all this manual grunt work that they're doing today. We also talk a little bit about revenue quality. Every organization today wants to be like a software company and have recurring revenue streams and get the benefits of the valuations that come with recurring revenue-based organizations. And we can go through some examples out here in a little bit later on. But that is an exciting but also daunting task for people, is how do you construct the deals that have the right composition of revenue quality in us with the right composition of products. We also then you got to look at efficiency. Every organization today is under extreme pressure on CAC. How do they increase their CAC? The more products you have, then the higher the cost of sales is naturally, based on overlay teams and stuff like that. So how do you do that in a more efficient way? So you've got productivity marks that are reasonably okay before either activist investors come into your stock and start forcing it to happen. And then probably the other one for me is really around revenue innovation. And when I look at revenue innovation, is every company is trying to figure out what is my go forward business model. So SaaS has shown that that's a good model. Then you've got consumption based models, you've meter based models. Then you've got, like, if I look at Michelin, who sell tires, Michelin now for the fleet, for the trucking and lorrying business, for the large fleets, are selling tires as a service. That's a whole different value proposition that they're bringing to market. So how do you introduce that new revenue type without cannibalizing the existing business, but test it, validate it? So you've got to be able to, in an organization that's not used to doing that type of stuff. So I think that, to me, so if we kind of elevate up out of, as you said, out of doc automation, CLM, CPQ, stuff like that, into, well, what are we trying to do systemically, end to end within the arc of the business itself? That, to me, is where I think there's real opportunity.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of that you described kind of resonates with conversations that I've been having with CROs and CEOs recently. Like, I was recently at the Gartner Chief Sales Officer Summit, and I was talking to a gentleman who's the VP of Revenue Operations for Eastman.
Yeah.
And they have like thousands of products, more than thousands of products, right? Yeah. And he had a really thoughtful thing that he was saying. He was just like, we were talking about, I think it was in the context of like new technology adoption. I think we were probably talking about AI stuff, but he had a really kind of thoughtful point. He's just like, look, we have to think about these things in like 5-year cycles and risk and so on and so forth, right? And then also and like make sure that we can deploy it in a way that's going to like prove utility, such that the CFO is going to be willing to continue to fund incremental investment there, right? We're not going to like do it's like agile versus waterfall, right? We're not going to do a huge build with like gargantuan risk. We're gonna do some build,
Yeah.
right, and then prove utility there. And then the second thing that I think is really important that you kind of spoke to is the notion, and this is something that we see with our customers here at Atrium, where historically we used to work with like 20 seller organizations or 50 seller organizations. Now we're
Mm.
working with organizations that have 500 sellers or 1,000 sellers. And when you're at that scale, you kind of think about business improvement with a little bit of a different lens, which is smaller bits of leverage across much larger transaction
Yeah.
volumes, right? And so, from our perspective with our customers, it's things like, hey, if I can get my field sales, or if through better performance management, I can get my field sales organization literally just doing like 10% more customer facing meetings,
Yeah.
right? But across 1,000 reps,
Yeah.
then that's going to drive like massive like revenue upside. It may not drive 10% revenue upside, but it might drive like 2 points or 3 points or 4 points, in which is like lovely for when you're talking about 1,000-person organization. And I think that's one of my favorite business books is The Goal, which is a manufacturing kind of like research book written as a novel, which makes it palatable. But essentially, like, how do you continuously optimize across that entire process? And I think I like how you kind of talked about this, was like decomposing the Conga service set into all those different kind of like Lego modules, such that we can say, okay, cool, this thing right here is probably the lowest hanging fruit in your organization, in your revenue lifecycle. Like, here's all the candidates that we might be able to go after. Let's actually target this one right here. The good news is like this kind of constraint in your revenue lifecycle actually probably just needs these three modules right here. We're gonna do this over 6 months. We're gonna hit the ball out of the park on it, and then we're gonna move on to the next most substantial constraint there. And I think and like all organizations have some sort of constraint in their revenue factory. So for anyone who's read The Goal previously, everyone's got a Herbie. Everyone's got a little Boy Scout kind of like stuck in the middle of the set of Boy Scouts there. Okay.
And maybe.
Oh, please.
I think one thing to that, Pete. I think probably two things for me. I think one, just picking up on that point. If you look at the decomposition of where sellers are spending their time, right, and you look at the internal facing time versus external facing time, and the quantum of stuff that goes around internally is just is so mundane. It's so, and it's
necessary evils, right? Necessary evils.
But it's also very frustrating for sales teams because they're impatient by nature, and so the more you can streamline that, so you can give them more time externally. Then the question to me on externally is, not everybody is good at constructing good commercial deals, and being able to understand how you construct good commercial deals is being able to obviously have a lot of experience, but also be able to understand if it's an existing customer, what the current contractual terms are.
Yep.
Being able to model deals, like, do proper deal analysis, so you can actually construct things. Is it a multi-year? Is it an add-on? Is it an add-on, a renewal? Like, there's a lot of complexity to doing deals, particularly as people are trying to either optimize spend, or you have a lot of other maybe startup companies or other companies that are trying to chip away at pieces of it as well. So the art of constructing a deal, there's not a lot of people can do it. So how can you get that at a point that's at scale across your organization, so more reps can get the benefit? Exactly.
Yeah. How do we have opinionated workflows that make what is artisanal and skillful also mundane, and coded DN, and make it such that like normal human beings can do it, as opposed to like a 30-year vet or what have you. Yeah. Well, one thing I would love to do, because I think you have a bunch of like really interesting kind of stories here, like examples to kind of crystallize this for folks. I would love to kind of like talk about some of the impacts that you've seen in the market here. Like I know that you guys do a bunch of work with Starbucks, who's
Yeah.
a big, I'm a big fan. Like I had a 30-minute long conversation with these two ladies at a Starbucks in Petaluma. At one of my son's camping trips, because they had just deployed the new runtime coffee like pour over machine.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
That is a $200,000 piece of capital equipment that is installed in all of the. It's essentially the coffee instantiation of what they do with what they've historically done with the espresso drinks,
Yeah.
but in this case, it's brewed coffee. So, like, obviously, Starbucks is very thoughtful when
Yeah.
it comes to deploying technical resources and IT resources in a way that is going to drive business impact. So, I'm curious what they kind of did with you guys.
Yeah. So if we'll go through a couple of examples here, but let's take Starbucks first. Starbucks is obviously a world-class brand, massive scale, multiple channels to market. And if you look at their one of their key channels to market, obviously is stores, Starbucks stores and Starbucks locations, some of which are company owned, some of which are franchise owned. The more you go internationally, the more they're franchise owned. The mix is much more dominantly franchise owned internationally.
Huh.
But you look at the process of sourcing them, vetting them, contracting with them, screening them, etc. That can be quite a pretty arduous process if you start looking at kind of the end-to-end contracting process. So if you look at a commercial organization who's in the business of attracting them, onboarding them, getting them set up, getting them productive, getting them into the supply chain.
Yep.
They're a commercial organization, but then the contracting process has to be able to move at the speed that the sales organization wants to work at. So what we've done with them is allow them to be able to standardize the contracting process across all GOs, understand the compliance and risk, make sure we're doing all the screening that's required for all the different screening requirements, background checking, vendor checking, slave labor. There's a whole army of things that have to be done depending on the country of operations you're in.
Wow.
And then be able to kind of take the obligations of the contracts, which is basically the body of the contracts, to make sure then that flows very seamlessly into the downstream setup and supply chain implications of that. Because the more we can compress that, the more we can automate that, then the faster the time to value is for them. The faster they can get them signed, the faster they can get them up and running. And there's a whole bunch of those. I'll maybe give you a couple of other examples as well. If I look at like GE Healthcare, which is an $18 billion organization, in the business of selling imaging devices, whether it's big MRI machines or ultrasound machines, and we've all used them in our lives, right?
I've definitely been inside one of them.
Exactly. But they're complex machines, right? These are very complex machines.
Yeah.
You might be selling them today, but you may be fulfilling them a year from now or a year and a half from now. But even the technology will have changed between that period of time. So there's a lot of change that goes to the innards of what the technology works on. There's also a lot of compliance depending on the jurisdiction you're in. But then there's a lot of a changing revenue model that's going into those companies. People would never have thought, probably, I wouldn't suspect your listeners would think that GE Healthcare is a software company, and it is. So they'll sell you a big MRI machine. They'll sell you the dye that goes into your arms in the MRI machines. They'll sell you the maintenance contract in those MRI machines, and they'll sell you a lot of software that's now becoming a recurring revenue stream for them on that as well, which I think is really, really important. So you take, for us with that, we have about 8,000 sellers. They use our product to configure products, price them, figure out the appropriate contracting mechanism that they want to be able to contract those services with over a long lifetime of things. And the most profitable revenue type that they have is their services business that goes on. They're getting all of that in one deal with all the revenue types. I'll give you one more example here of Hitachi Energy. So Hitachi Energy is in the business of selling power equipment, from building big power plants to servicing existing power plants. Big focus on renewable energy, which is a huge part of their business. Again, very complex products, lots of interdependencies, a lot of build to order, a lot of build to stock. So you think about, you're talking about multi-million-dollar contracts, and even with a B behind them. So big contracts. But there's such a broad product set. If you start looking at all the SKUs that they have that can sell, being able to kind of obviously the sales guys are very involved in the first deals, but the ongoing kind of repair and maintenance kind of streams, the replacement parts part of it, been able to kind of stand up a more e-commerce, B2B commerce front end, which they've set up a thing called PowerShop.
Interesting.
Customers can come in, they understand what they've bought, they understand the products that fit within that, so that all the product dependencies is there, they understand the pricing that's been pre-negotiated, and they can place orders directly against those contracts that they have today.
That's that's Conga backed.
That's Conga backed. So they can.
It's like a B2B e-com interface with.
Yeah, it's a B2B e-com front end to all the product catalog that we already have for all the sellers. So the sellers see the full opportunities, but it's also lowering their cost of sales. So, which is a pretty important thing for them. It also allows them to change what types of things do they want their resellers doing, their distributors doing, versus the sales guys doing. And this is a journey of experimentation with them as well. And probably the last example I'll give you is in the health and life sciences industry. So if you look at that industry, particularly the companies that are focused on, drug development, and if I look at like AbbVie, who is kind of in the purveyor of Botox and the Skyrizi, the one that's all over the TVs right now. Mm-hmm. Clinical trials is a huge thing for them all, and so when they get a patent on a new drug, the clock starts on the patent expiration of 20 years.
Better hurry.
So they got to get going. They got to get going on clinical trials and getting patients and getting people to do it so they can kind of get it through the FDA approval process.
Interesting.
And all of that today is a wildly complex, wildly regulated, just a friction-laden process. Being able to kind of reduce every week, every month, you can reduce from that process to get it through the FDA process and then get it into your distribution networks is really important. So, every business has got huge implications that kind of goes beyond this construct of just, can I quote a product? Can I generate a price? Can I generate an invoice? It's the broader implications of automating the end-to-end process, integrating it in upstream and downstream, and then bringing intelligence to the process, as most of those processes today are not very smart in general.
Wow. Okay. So that sounds, a bunch of really kind of cool examples there, and I'm sure that you have a bajillion other ones as well. But some of these, the notion, it sounds like there's the, hey, we just want to harmonize our product catalog and do kind of document automation and kind of quoting stuff and what have you. You guys can, obviously there's customers doing that. And I think that was kind of more the greenfield that you were talking about. And then you have these really scaled organizations who are looking to do what essentially is digital transformation, but not in a full, let's write the code from scratch kind of situation. So the fact that I think it was Hitachi, you said, essentially has implemented an e-commerce experience using Conga as their, as one component of the backend is it's pretty amazing if you think about it. So you say you have very complicated, very sophisticated, and then you kind of have lower complication, lower sophistication, or lower level of effort. And so I'm kind of curious as to what that looks like from a deployment standpoint, because I think we're apt, oftentimes we like to talk about the sexiest kind of double black diamond race car examples here, but a lot of people can be holy mackerel, that sounds like that's going to take 36 months. Right. And so I imagine that's where kind of partners like Accenture come in, and also kind of appropriate scoping and what have you. Maybe you can kind of speak to how organizations are, getting started with revenue lifecycle management.
Yeah, listen, I think the kind of a little bit of the analogy I use a little bit is, you need speedboats around your oil tankers, that can actually move quicker, right? And, if I look at kind of the big anchor tenants of, many enterprises, companies, you'll have, SAP, you'll have Oracle, you'll have Salesforce, you'll have these big entities that kind of have a broad footprint and typically are a little bit of a slow moving object in general. And so the question is, how do you fit into that and bring agility and speed and deliver on low-hanging fruit quickly? And that's where, you need a services-based architecture that you can do that and kind of do your bite-sized chunks that we're talking about earlier on and get in and start demonstrating value fast.
Right.
Two is then you also need partners who are in the middle sometimes of those programs and they also need wins, right? They have the domain knowledge. They can introduce you in. They can connect two pieces together. They're disconnected today, and they can train an industry that has not yet seen what good looks like in that domain, frankly. So I think that's where like people like Accenture are very skilled at doing, because they're in many cases the pretty substantial teams doing SAP S4 HANA implementations, of pretty substantial teams doing implementations on maybe consolidation of sales clouds across a lot of the harmonizations going on within projects themselves. So we then become a nice kind of a glue that binds the front office to the back office in reality. So
Yeah, and I would imagine that like not only has Accenture seen this story before, but also Conga's seen this story before, because I think you said, was it 1,000 customers? No, 10,
10,000. Yeah.
10,000 customers. Um, regardless of what vertical the prospective client is in,
Yeah.
you probably have anywhere from 10 to 100 in that vertical who have already addressed, like, with whom you've already kind of just addressed these various topics. Okay, and so I mean, so that's kind of like the deployment piece of it, but then I wonder, like, okay, there's the first win, and then there's like, what about the next one and the next one and the next one? Again, the gentleman, who's a really thoughtful guy, the gentleman I was talking with from Eastman was talking about this, where he's like, hey, like, there's the quick win or what have you, but also the change management associated with like an implementation or a deployment. Put aside the like the cost associated with like licensing, or even the sunk cost associated with the deployment or what have you. There's also just all the change management associated with getting the organization to line up around new processes and what have you. So they want to have confidence that not only is there, like, we want to validate with an initial win that this isn't baloney, but then we also want to have a credible narrative that there's more to be captured in the future, because that's like where we're actually going to get return on our internal investment here. So maybe you can kind of talk about what those incremental innings end up looking like, and how that scales out across different use cases and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first thing I would say is, obviously, is you kind of go back to the construct of revenue. All the key personas within an executive team have their fingers on revenue, whether it's the chief product officer, what are products, what are the bundles, what are the discounts, what are the pricing, what are the new things we're offering, what are the new business models we're introducing, right? You go right through sales, chief legal officer, CFO, CXO, et cetera. So all of those personas have an element to do with it, and and the collaboration naturally with those teams is not always, as we said earlier on, organic. But once you start looking at the construct then of starting to automate, first off, your existing revenue processes, new account add, addendum to an account, renewal to account, expansion of an account, cancel and replace, whatever all the different processes that you do today, that customers will do today, getting those just automated and systematized. So that frees up capacity. The second thing then is being able to integrate in upstream and downstream. So start taking those, so instead of people keying on keyboards, that there's more automation into things that generate the examples. So for example, I'll give you, if I take Terminix as an example, the first, Terminix wants to sell you a service door to door, right? But then when the field tech is in the field and they have you as a customer, the upsell motion then is now in the hands of the field tech, where they'll come in and say, well, yes, we just sprayed your house, you've got carpenter bees, we can add on another $5 a month into your subscription. Is that okay for you, Mr. Sir, ma'am? And if so, can you just sign here? And so that's a process where you integrate in the product, the contract, the signature, and into the invoicing process in the hands of a tablet in the person that's actually in the field doing the work. So that becomes integration. Then you take the next step back and you start looking at what I term as intelligence. And I come back to things like, wouldn't you love to know if you sold 1,000 licenses of a particular product that 2 years ahead of your renewal motion, that you were well pacing behind the adoption of that product, that out of, instead of 1,000 users, you've only, let's say, 100 users using it, 100 users assigned, but even only 20 users using it. So you can run proactive adoption plays into those customers well before a renewal cycle comes up, as an example.
Right.
Wouldn't you like to know that what you have actually contracted is what's been built? I can't tell you the amount of people who can't correlate what was contracted to what's actually on the invoice going out to customers, and do they
Right.
match? So there's so many use cases where you can, now that you have access to win rates, product bundles, discounting, billings, order fulfillment.
Hey everyone. So we experienced a little bit of a technical issue and our session was cut off. Before we wrap up, I had one final question for Noel, which was, once a company has implemented RLM strategies, revenue lifecycle management strategies, what are the keys to sustaining growth and ensuring the scalability of those processes? Noel's response was great. It had two kind of key points. One, make sure to invest in technology that actually scales and provides continuous training for your teams. And then two, you want to consistently measure performance of those RLM processes, right? So look for areas of improvement, make sure look out for trends, ensure that processes are effective and widely adopted, right? Those are the things that you want to, keep your eye on there. Also wanted to say special thanks to Conga for putting this event together. We love partnering with them. Go ahead and make sure to click the button at the top of the page to request a demo with them. And we'll see you on June 18th for the panel Sealing the Deal When Sales Meets Legal, CLM's Perfect Match. This event is also sponsored by Conga along with Salesforce and Accenture, and we're going to go ahead and drop that link in the chat. Thanks.